Thank you very much. And is this audible? Yes. So thanks so much, Koinur, for this delightful invitation and an opportunity to meet with all of you. I have many links to Pune, and it's always a pleasure to come back. I did my PhD here at the physics department, which will also tell you that I'm a little bit of a joker in this pack. I did my PhD in physics, and during some postdoctoral work is when I moved to study neuroscience. And it started out with a foray into looking at songbird learning. So birds learn to sing very similar to the way humans learn how to speak. And that's how I started my journey in neuroscience, and have since worked at the National Brain Research Center, where we did some work on biliteracy, some work on autism. And that's really the reason why I got into music and emotion. And one of the things we realized when we were working with kids with autism was that they respond very well to sung speech, but not very well to spoken speech. And so I was curious to know whether we could actually try and capitalize on music to help them understand emotion. And since I wanted to keep to cultural context, I wanted to try and use Indian music. And that's how this whole journey into the Rasa and the Raga actually began. So I will come back to Ashoka University towards the end of the talk, since there are quite a few people who have questions about this. But let me walk you through what is going to be a little bit of a tumultuous journey, because I might overload you with information, but I'm very greedy to share what I've learned and to get some opinions about it. So bear with me, and hopefully we'll find some method in the madness. Okay. So all of you are probably familiar with North Indian classical music, and we know it's capable of inducing different emotional states. It's had a very long history and has its earliest origins in the Natya Shastra. And the whole word raga actually originates in Sanskrit and is defined as the coloring or dyeing of the mind. And so the understanding is and was that when ragas were created, the king or the ruler wanted to experience a particular emotional state, and so told the musician that this is what I want to experience, and so create music that can put me in that emotional state. Essentially already establishing the fact that music has the capability of inducing emotions. That's something that we've known for many, many years, but we haven't really investigated it so much from an empirical viewpoint in India. Okay? And so I'm going to step back a little bit and walk you through some notions of the structure of a raga and why I want to make a case that Indian classical ragas are a unique set of stimuli which lend themselves to pursue some of the most interesting questions in neuroscience and how emotion and music might be related. Okay? So a raga is typically consists of a combination of 5 or more notes used to construct a melody, and these are combined in creative ways to generate specific emotions. Okay? The simplest way to try and understand and approach this is to think of the alap, which is a note-by-note delineation, has a slow tempo but might not have a rhythm to it. Okay? The gath, on the other hand, is at a faster tempo for a raga, uses exactly the same notes as what I used in the alap, but has a rhythm attached to it. Okay? And I want to draw attention to this whole notion of rhythm as a feature and the use of these specific notes, which I will go on to call tonality. Okay? And so the introduction to the tonic intervals to a raga. Okay? So ragas are typically composed of tonal intervals, in the sense that the way they are constructed, the way the scale is constructed, you always hear the note relative to the bass note, okay, or the tonic tone, in this case the sa. Okay? And so you have major intervals, what people in Western music call major notes, and minor intervals. Okay, and so you have the major notes are also what we call Shuddha Swaras, and the minor intervals are typically the Komal Swaras. And you also have the flat or the Tivra Ma in between, which has a particular nuance, and I've outlined on the right what these specific frequency intervals are and how they are also rounded off. Okay, I won't go into the details because that can get a little technical, and I also don't have time to be able to do that, but we can always discuss this in greater detail. Okay. So some interesting facts about ragas are that you can have the same set of notes across the two ragas. So example being Miyaki Malhar and Bahar, where the notes are similar, but the way they are approached are quite distinct, and as a consequence, the kind of emotions that they might give rise to might vary. And then every raga has something called the pakad, which is like a signature, like a fingerprint for the raga, which is often used by those who are regular listeners, or kansains as we call them, to identify the raga. Okay? And then all of this is set into a larger scheme, because there are so many ragas that can actually be created, called the thats, okay, and which is a framework really to organize ragas. And so a that is defined as a parent scale, okay, which is heptatonic in nature. So there are 7 notes, out of which you will extract out 5 or 6 or 7, but a minimum of 5. And it really attempts to provide a taxonomic framework so that you can organize the ragas into some kind of coherent families. Okay? And way back in 1934, Vishnu Bhat Khande organized and created something called the Circle of Thats, okay, which is organized thus. And though we have known of this Circle of Thats, there has not been a very clear understanding about why the Circle of Thats was set up, how it was organized, and might there be an underlying feature that he used to actually characterize certain ragas into certain thats. Okay? So that's the gap, or that's pretty much the situation that we were in when we started out this work somewhere in 2012, okay, way back now. And though we've known that ragas elicit different emotions, there was very little empirical work to support it. And the first and the simplest question we wanted to ask was, do distinct ragas elicit distinct emotions? And being the fact that I did come from a physics background, I also had an interest in acoustic parameters to see if any of these acoustic parameters could actually try and provide an explanation for why there might be a relationship between the emotions experienced and the structure of the raga. Okay? So that's where we started out. So before COVID, we actually, we ran an internet survey. This was way before COVID, and we didn't realize it would become so popular. And a young student actually designed the study. And the study was the following. Okay. We had a musician actually record 12 ragas. Okay. We let the musician choose which were the ragas that he would wish to record. Our only request was, can they please belong to different thats, or at least sample the thats reasonably well. He recorded 3-minute renditions, okay, and both in alap and in gath. And these were then put into this behavioral survey, and I won't get into the details on the demographic information or how we organized it. We can talk about that a little more in detail. But what each participant who was part of that survey was required to do was to rate every raga on 8 emotions that we took from the Natya Shastra. The idea was that you might experience more than one emotion whilst listening to a raga, and we wanted to capture that. But we also wanted to capture whether there was a difference in the intensity of which emotion you experienced. So reasonably standard format of the study. And we ran it online for about 6 months. And before I share with you the results of that study, let me play a little bit for you and see how you would rate these emotions. Okay? This is Pandit Mukesh Sharma, who actually recorded these pieces, and we used the sarod for this purpose. And a very conscious attempt to use non-semantic, non-vocal music was, we wanted to focus on the acoustic structure of the raga to try and get to the underlying emotion. Okay? So let's hope everything plays here. Oh, there it is. Any thoughts? I've only played 30 seconds for you, but any thoughts about the kind of emotion you experienced? Yes? Peaceful. Anybody else? Longing. Longing. Say that again? Slowed you down. Okay, thank you. Contemplative, okay. Now let's go to the same raga, but now played in gat. Oh my. Where is my mouse? Struggling to run.
You can see it there, but not here. So you just look there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. Any change in the emotion now? Sad. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Anybody who differs? Okay, a little energized. This one. Nostalgic, longing. Say that again. Stressing. Expressing. Okay. need to ask. Yeah? The best part about whenever I play this is how 50% of the audience starts tapping their foot. And that's my greatest sort of validation that there's something called emotion contagion. Okay. So, sorry. For whatever reason, my skills on navigating this are not working out. So we collected data from about 255 participants from different parts of the world, but broadly people from India and people from the rest of the world is how we are going to categorize them. And given that I just have 5 more minutes to speak and at least 20 more slides to go through, I'm going to rush through a bit of the results. Okay. So these were some great comments that people made as they were listening to these pieces of music, essentially to also validate that they did experience different emotions and different thoughts that came in, which characterize the distinct nature of the ragas. Okay? And here, if I now draw your attention to the fact that if you look at the first row, I've just labeled out the ragas right now in an order. But you can see that most of them have been rated for all of them have been rated for all emotions. But if you look at, say, Hanswadani for that matter, the red is really strong out there. Okay? And then if you look at Marwa or Malkons, the blue is really strong over there. Okay? So there does seem to be a variety of responses between plaintive or negative, as they call them, and positive ragas. And then, if you go to Gath, the class of the response sort of remains the same. If a raga was called positive, it continued to be called positive. But the nature of the emotion probably got a little more specific. So in the case of the positive ragas, for instance, if it was calm, it became happy. Okay? In one case, if it was calm, it became sad. Okay? And right now, for lack of time, we don't have enough time for you to go over all of them, but you have to just take my word for it and go back to it later. Okay? And then we looked at characterizing their rhythmic features. Okay? And you can calculate something called note density and pulse clarity to characterize the acoustic feature. And sure enough, the Gath shows up in both cases, telling you that there is a very distinct difference in the rhythm and the characterizing the beats that you experience, which you also experienced as you listen to it. Okay? And then one went back to look at tonality, okay? So which is used as a central organizing principle in many music systems, and essentially tells you how is a particular note heard with respect to a specific basic pitch. Okay? And here, if you go back and look at the different ragas and see how they were characterized, here's what's very interesting. Okay? So there are a set of ragas that you see which have a background of light pink. And in all of them, if you look carefully, you can see the Shuddha swaras dominate. Okay? So ragas which have an overexpression of primarily Shuddha swaras actually get categorized as positive. And the moment the minor notes or the komal swaras come in, you can see how the emotion starts to shift towards incorporating more of the plainative features or the negative features. Okay? And you can actually go ahead and calculate a distribution of these. Okay? And so you find that there is an association that seems to emerge between the major and the minor notes and the underlying emotion experienced. And then, in order to see whether there was a role for a specific tonic interval, we did stepwise linear regression analysis. And lo and behold, what you find is, if you have the komal ray, the minor second, that actually acts like a predictor for negative emotion. So if there's going to be a minor second, you can be assured that raga is going to be classified as plainative or negative in nature in terms of the emotion that's underlying it. Okay? And so, to try and capture this further, we came up with a tonic ratio, which is an interval of a ratio of the minor to the major notes of the raga. And you can see that defined on the extreme right column over here. So Hansadhani, for example, belongs to Bilaval, which has only positive notes. Okay? And then if you go back down, you can see there are a couple of others, say Tilak, Kamot, Rageshri, and Desh, all belong to Kamaj, which has a ratio of like 0.7. And this continues to increase. And so if you plot this tonic ratio on the x-axis, and then you plot the average happy rating versus the average tense rating of the ragas, you find as the tonic ratio increases, the happy ratings reduce. And now, if you go back, and that's where that color would have helped. Maybe यहाँ पे थोड़ा contrast बढ़ा दीजिए. There's a red here, okay? And what you're able to see is, if you use the tonic ratio, that can actually be used to provide a possible explanation for the circle of thoughts, okay? Because if you look at the organization of the ragas, as the ratio changes, you can see how they might be organized along the circle of thoughts, with the ones which are belonging to the positive, which have primarily Shuddha swaras sitting at one end, and the one sitting at the extreme negative nature sitting at the other end. And what's very surprising is the one which is the most negative in nature, there are actually no ragas. So if you had only minor notes and no major notes, no such raga exists today. Okay? So this is one possible way of trying to look at why the organization of the circle of thoughts might have been proposed. There was an underlying notion already of the underlying emotion that might be experienced, and how the organization of the ragas leads to that. Again, given the lack of time, I'm going to quickly run through. And then we did a comparison with the non-enculturated, the people who were not belonging to India. And this is just one figure to show that there is actually very little difference between people from India versus outside India. Okay? And this is a horrendous plot, but I only want you to focus on the one where there are stars. Okay? Essentially to draw home the point that there are only 9% of the cases where the emotion ratings actually differed starkly from those belonging to Indian participants. But that opens up a huge window of opportunity for us. You have a bunch of stimuli now that can actually be used universally to study music and emotion. Okay? And that's extremely exciting, and I think it's probably also a manifestation of the fact that the music has been received so favorably across the world. Okay? So just one last bit of information before I wind up. But we wanted to see whether those people from India versus those from outside India actually used similar features, the rhythm and the tonality, to arrive at their emotional response. And so you have rhythm and tonality as the two features. You have the two groups at the bottom, and you want to see which of these features explains the variance in the responses better. And here is where something interesting and surprising comes up. But if you think about it, probably not that surprising. So people from India actually use more tonality to explain the responses, whereas people from the West actually use more rhythm to be able to explain their emotional response. Okay? So really speaking, and it's something I think if you go back and think about music that's unfamiliar to you, one of the things you probably use the most easily is rhythm. Okay, it's one of the things we learn very early on in life. And so rhythm is almost considered a primeval feature that all human beings have. And that's what probably all of these participants were able to use to arrive at it. In India, on the other hand, some of these tonalities are also manifested in the way we speak and refer to each other. Okay? And so this tonality also gets increased, and probably we become more aware of it as we go along. Okay. So I'll quickly wind up here to say, here are summarizing some of the results that we've seen. But I think one feature which came up across the board was all the ragas were rated for calm emotion, okay? And there was a school that we know that actually used this information to play these ragas as students moved across classes. And that helped the teachers and the students to get into a calming state of mind, okay, which was kind of encouraging for us. These are the people who've done all this fabulous work, and I get to talk about it. And this is just to end up by saying that at Ashoka University, we are also in the process of setting up, along with the Center for Science of Learning, a Center for Neuroaesthetics. So this meeting and conference couldn't be more timely. Thank you very much.